A house does not collapse because it has many rooms. It collapses when its pillars are weak. To build a house that lasts, you must first know the ground it stands on. There is something we must say before we go any further. It is important to understand the world our ancestors lived in. It was not a simple world. Our ancestors were not naive. They were people of the earth. They knew the soil, they knew the sky, and they knew the human heart. They had seen too much of life to be fooled by easy stories. They knew that survival was not guaranteed. It was earned every day with sweat and with wisdom. They understood that life is a serious thing. They did not imagine human beings as simple. No. They knew we are creatures of many currents, like a river that can be calm one moment and raging the next. They saw the kindness in people, yes, but they also saw the envy. They saw the generosity, and they saw the greed. They saw the loyalty and the betrayal. They did not turn away from this. They looked at it all, the beautiful and the difficult, and they accepted it as the truth of who we are. They did not build families on wishes. A wish is a fragile thing, like a spider's web in the morning. It is beautiful, but it cannot hold the weight of a life. It cannot protect you from the storm. A family, a community, needed a foundation much stronger than a wish. It needed a foundation of truth. It needed to be built for the hard days, not just the easy ones. So they watched. They watched life closely. They watched the seasons change. They watched the crops grow, and the rains come or not come. They watched the children being born, and the elders passing on. They saw the great circle of life and death, and they understood that every person had a place within it. They learned the patterns of survival, the rhythms of the land, and the needs of the people. They watched desire. They saw how it could build a home, and how it could burn one down. They saw the longing for a partner, for children, for respect, for more land, for more cattle. Desire was a fire. It could warm the hearth and cook the food. But if it was not contained, if it was not respected, it could spread and consume everything. They did not judge this fire. They knew it was part of being alive. They watched conflict. They knew that wherever you have people, you will have disagreement. Over land, over water, over a careless word, over a broken promise. They saw how small resentments could grow into bitter feuds, dividing families and weakening the village. Conflict was like a stone in the shoe. If you ignore it, it will eventually make you unable to walk. It had to be taken out. It had to be dealt with. They watched responsibility. They saw how it was the thread that held the community together. The responsibility of a parent to a child. The responsibility of a child to their elders. The responsibility of a neighbor to a neighbor. It was the duty to provide, to protect, to teach, to care for the sick, to honor the ancestors. This was not a burden. It was the structure that gave life meaning and safety. It was the promise that you would not be left alone. They watched and they learned. For generations, they gathered this wisdom. And when something caused harm, when a pattern of behavior brought sorrow and instability, they did not pretend it did not exist. They did not hide from the truth. To ignore a problem was to invite ruin. It was to allow a poison to spread through the roots of the family tree. So they spoke about it. They gathered. They built systems. They built ways of being together. Rules, structures, expectations. These were not cages. They were channels, like the ones dug to bring water to the crops. They were designed to guide the powerful currents of human nature, so they would nourish the community, not flood it. Everyone knew the rules. Everyone knew what was expected of them and what they could expect from others. There was clarity. These systems were not made to make people perfect. Our ancestors knew that perfection is not for human beings. We are flawed. We make mistakes. We hurt each other, even when we do not mean to. The goal was never to erase our nature, but to manage it. The goal was to make life workable, to create a way for imperfect people to live together in a difficult world, to build families that could withstand storms, to ensure that children were cared for, that elders were honored, and that there was a place for everyone, to create a life of balance, of predictability, and of peace. We are told stories now, beautiful stories, about a man and a woman who meet, and their hearts connect, and from that, a family is born. This is a sweet story. But it is not the old story. It is not the beginning of the story. For our people, for those who came long before us, family did not begin as romance. It began as something much more fundamental. It began as survival, not just the survival of one person or two, but the survival of the whole, the understanding that we are stronger together than we are apart. In the old times, the land was hard, and the seasons were unpredictable. To be alone was to be vulnerable. A single person could not build a home and tend the fields and watch for danger all at once. A family, a community. That was our shelter. That was our strength. It was the first and most important agreement. We will face this world together. And survival meant there was work to be done. Always. The earth did not give its gifts freely. It had to be persuaded. It had to be tended to with care and knowledge passed down through generations. So, food had to be grown. This was the rhythm of life. The turning of the soil, the planting of the seed, the patient waiting for the rain, and the joy of the harvest. It was a promise made to the earth and to each other. A promise that no one would go hungry, because everyone contributed to the work of feeding the family. And as the community grew, new life was a blessing, a sign that the ancestors were pleased and the future was secure. But a child is not a crop to be planted and left to the sun. A child is a seed of the spirit, needing constant warmth and guidance. So, children had to be raised. They had to be taught the ways of the people, the stories of the past, the skills for the future. This was not the work of one person alone. It was the work of the entire village. Every adult was a teacher, every neighbor a guardian. A child belonged to everyone, and everyone belonged to the child. Just as we received life from those who came before, we had a duty to them, as their own strength began to fade. The old ones were not burdens. They were libraries of wisdom. They held the memory of the community. They knew the patterns of the stars, the remedies from the forest, and the lessons from past mistakes. Their minds were sharp even when their bodies grew tired. So, elders had to be cared for. To give them comfort and respect was to honor the very roots of the family tree. It was a sacred trust, ensuring that their final years were filled with peace and dignity. All of this, the growing of food, the raising of children, the caring for elders, was about something bigger than one lifetime. It was about the chain of life, stretching from the first ancestor into a future we would never see. The blood, the name, the land, the stories. These were a sacred inheritance. And so, lineage had to be protected. It was the thread that connected everyone. To protect it was to ensure that the community would not just survive for another season, but would endure for generations to come. It was the ultimate responsibility. But our ancestors were not made of stone. They were people, with hearts that beat and blood that ran warm. They knew that within this structure of survival, the human spirit was alive and full of feeling. Desire existed. The pull between a man and a woman, the spark of attraction, it was as natural as the rain. It was a powerful force, one that could create life, but also one that could create chaos if not understood and respected. And where there is desire, its shadow is never far behind. The fear of loss, the sting of seeing affection given to another, the ache in the heart. Jealousy existed. It was a fire that could warm a home or burn it to the ground. It was a part of being human, a feeling as old as the hills. To deny it was to lie to oneself. People were not all the same. Some were quiet, others were loud. Some were patient, others were quick to anger. Some found joy in farming, others in storytelling. Difference existed. Every person was a unique thread in the great tapestry of the community. These differences could create friction, but they also brought strength and colour and new ideas. No one was surprised by this. They did not expect people to be perfect. They did not expect life to be free of conflict or strong emotions. They knew that human nature was a river with many currents, some gentle, some turbulent. They accepted this reality with clear eyes. It was the way of the world. So instead of pretending people would change, instead of wishing that desire and jealousy would simply vanish, they did something wise. They built containers for these powerful forces. Systems were created to guide behavior. These were not cages to trap the human spirit, but channels, like irrigation for a river, to direct its energy toward the good of the community. They were agreements, rules, and traditions that everyone understood. They provided clarity. They set expectations. They were designed to minimize harm and maximize harmony so that the work of survival could continue. These systems were not whispered in corners, not quietly. They were not hidden behind closed doors, not secretly. They were known by all, discussed by all, and lived by all, out in the open. The rules of marriage, the responsibilities of a husband, the rights of a wife, the path of inheritance, these were common knowledge. Transparency was the key. When everyone knows the rules, it is much harder for injustice to hide in the shadows. Our ancestors understood something we struggle with today. They understood that you cannot build a strong house on a weak foundation. They knew that pretending a problem does not exist is the most foolish kind of magic. They faced the truth of human nature, in all its beauty and all its difficulty. They knew that ignoring reality does not make it disappear. It is like ignoring a small crack in a clay pot. The crack will not heal itself. With time and with pressure, it will only grow wider until the pot shatters. You cannot wish away the truth. You must face it. You must work with it. Ignoring reality does not make it safe. It only makes it dangerous. When feelings are forced into hiding, when desires are not acknowledged, they do not go away. They fester in the dark. They become secrets. And secrets, my child, are where the real danger lies. They create mistrust. They break the bonds of community. Our ancestors knew this, and so they chose to live in the light. There was never one universal family structure. Across Africa, across Asia, across the Middle East, across indigenous societies, different models existed side by side. Some families were monogamous, some were polygynous, some were extended and communal. What mattered was not uniformity. What mattered was clarity. Everyone knew the rules. Everyone knew the expectations. Everyone knew their responsibilities. No model was treated as a fantasy. Each was treated as work. When people today hear of a man with more than one wife, they imagine noise, fighting, a house full of storms. But this is not the memory I carry. Polygyny, in the world of my grandmothers, did not exist as chaos. It was not a storm, it was a building. It had foundations in our customs, walls of shared understanding, and a roof held up by everyone beneath it. It existed as structure, as carefully planned as the village itself. This structure was visible. It came with rules, spoken by the elders and lived every day. Rules about fairness, time and resources. They were the grammar of our life together, so everyone spoke the same language of respect. And where there were rules, there was accountability. A person's actions were not their own private business. They belonged to the family and the village. If a promise was broken, it was a matter for the circle of elders, for the community that held the memory of all promises made. Because no single person could hold all the power, the structure came with limits. A man's wealth was a measure of his ability to care for others. The needs of the whole family placed a fence around the wants of one person. These limits were not a cage, but the banks of a river which guide the water and give it strength. So you see, a man could not simply collect wives. Each wife was a commitment, a new branch on the family tree that needed its own sun and water. It was a responsibility that could be measured. Before he could ask for another hand in marriage, He had to prove he could provide for the hands he already held. This meant a separate dwelling, land to cultivate, and security for each wife and her children, woven into the fabric of the homestead. He also had to protect. This was a duty to all, to shield the family from hunger, sickness, and conflict. His strength was not for his own glory. It was the shield for everyone who called his compound home. His choices were never made in a vacuum. He had to answer to his family and community. The elders were the guardians of the customs. To bring a new wife into the family required their counsel and blessing. His life was an open book, and they were all reading it with him. In this structure, women were not shadows. They were pillars, each holding up her own part of the roof. A home with two wives was not one home, but two homes joined by a shared path. Each woman was the heart of her own household. They had roles. The senior wife often held a special place of honor, a guide to the younger wives. There were roles in the fields, the market, and in raising the children. This was the work that turned a collection of people into a family. And because they had roles, they had voices. A woman's voice carried weight, especially as she grew older. The grandmothers were the ultimate authority on family matters. Their wisdom was sought, their approval needed. A woman's voice was essential to the harmony of the home. Life was a constant negotiation. Before a marriage, families would agree on the bride price, a symbol of the bond being created. Within the family, wives negotiated responsibilities and resources. It was a dance of finding balance. And the children. The children were the purpose, the future given a face and a name. A child's arrival was a celebration for the entire community, a sign that the family line would continue. They were part of a lineage. A child was not just the child of a mother and father, but of the clan. They inherited a name, a history, a place in the world prepared for them. To know your lineage was to know who you were. They were part of an inheritance, not just of land, but of relationships. If a parent passed away, the child was never an orphan. The community would raise that child as their own. The inheritance was belonging. Through them, the family lived beyond death, carrying the stories and songs into the future. They were the reason for the structure. So when we look back, we must see that the system was not designed for suffering, but for stability and survival. The danger was never plurality itself. The structure was built to hold it. The danger was secrecy, a relationship hidden from the family, a child whose father was not known, a promise made in the dark and denied in the light. That is where the poison was. Our grandmothers knew this. When things were named, they could be managed. When a second wife was welcomed openly, her place was clear and her rights were known. When everything was in the light, problems could be seen from far away. But when things were hidden, they became destructive. A secret relationship creates jealousy. A hidden child creates shame. A lie, once planted, grows roots that crack the foundation. It is the unseen fire, smouldering beneath the floor, that burns the whole house down. Modern systems promise simplicity, one shape, one rule, one acceptable model. But desire did not disappear. It went underground. Law replaced community, privacy replaced accountability, silence replaced honesty. And now we live with a contradiction. We demand exclusivity, but tolerate secrecy. We preach commitment, but accept double lives. We call this progress, but we must ask carefully. If desire remained the same, what happened to the systems that once held it? This episode is not asking you to choose a model. It is asking you to remember something important. Structures exist to protect people from pretending. In the next chapter, we will ask a harder question. Who gets to choose these structures today? And who pays the price when they fail?